Third question you raised, sir, was in relation to truth commissions. I've discussed this at length. I've been in Washington this week. I've had 2 meetings and a dinner with the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. What is on his mind, what is in the mind of the Senate Judiciary Committee, what is on the mind of the Obama transition team, is what needs to be done. And I think there's now an emerging consensus. It's not about engaging in a witch hunt. It's not about committing to investigations or prosecutions, although that may be something that comes later. What needs to be done now is the country needs to be able to move on. In order to be able to move on, it needs to come to terms with what has happened. And that is best achieved, in my view, on the basis of what I know of this country, with some form of bipartisan committee chaired by people of unimpeachable authority who are able to establish the facts, who are given subpoena powers to obtain everything that they need to obtain, and perhaps have the recommendation to go very far in terms of what happened next. I think there is a growing consensus that that is something that can be done. I think we can all imagine the names, the kinds of names of individuals of unimpeachable characteristics, whether Democrat, whether Republican, who are able to assist in doing that. I don't think that should be put off for a year. I think that needs to happen quickly. And I think part of the reason it needs to happen quickly is the longer it is delayed, the less quickly we will all move on to deal with the things we really need to deal with, which is how do we deal with these challenges that we face. That's the real issue. But I don't think we can fully deal with that without coming to terms with what has happened. What are the greatest challenges facing the Obama administration? I mean, you've got to have, irrespective of your views, some sympathy for a president-elect coming in to a country with an economy that is really in a shocking state, with a raft of in-tray materials dealing with foreign relations that is overwhelming. And yet that, I think, provides an opportunity to do some remarkable things. Plainly, the economy is item number one that has got to be sorted out, to restore a sense of well-being, to restore a sense of confidence in the direction that the country is going, to make people feel that they have a strong future. But I think the real challenge that the president faces, and this is something that I think everyone in this room has to face, is that it is a different world situation. I think the legacy that President Bush has bequeathed to this country is he has brought forward the moment at which the United States' writ in the world is diminished. It is a different world. What the United States has learnt in the past 8 years is, in a sense, what Britain learnt in the 1920s and the 1930s. It is no longer able to impose its will on the rest of the world, whether in relation to the economy, whether in relation to military matters, whether in relation to the struggle against terrorism. It requires allies. It requires cooperation. Cooperation requires rules. And that's going to require a very, very different mindset. It's going to require a president who can tell the people of this country across the spectrum, we are not able to impose the kind of changes on the world that we want to impose on our own. And I think that, in a sense, is a very, very big challenge, because people in this country have been used to being told they are the best, they are the strongest, they are the most powerful economically, they are the most powerful militarily. Those days are over. It's gone. It's finished. It's a different world now. Other countries are coming up, and it's got to be in cooperation. And the leadership that the United States can provide, like no other country, is a leadership by inspiration, by authority, by ideas, by creativity, by innovation, and by commitment to the values that have made this country as strong and as powerful and as great as it has been in the last 50 years, and that is by a commitment to the rule of law. But that is a very, very big challenge for the next President of the United States.
Thank you, David. Well, I'm painfully aware that I'm the last speaker on the last panel on the last day of the symposium. And if that's not a challenge enough, I have to follow Philippe with his impeccable British accent. I'll respond to the questions, I think, in a collective manner. Let me start from a macro perspective and work my way down to definitive recommendations. I am now in my 37th year in the practice of public international law, a lot of that focused on the law of war and the law of armed conflict. And because of that, I have traveled to many international conferences. And as I travel to international conferences in the post-9/11 era, and I spy friendly colleagues across the room and folks that I've known for years and years, I know what's coming. They almost drop their cups of tea or coffee as they charge across the room toward me. And about halfway across the room they say, "What are you people doing? What are you people thinking?" Now, they always put that in much more colorful language, but that's the essence of it. What are you thinking? What are you doing? And then they say, "You know, we don't mean to minimize or denigrate the horrific nature of 9/11, but after all, David, these are simply acts of terrorism." They say, "Now, you may relate it to state-sponsored terrorism, and we don't deny your right to enter into combatant activity with Afghanistan as a state sponsor of terrorism, but after all, they're acts of terrorism." And for years, as acts of terrorism occurred in Africa and Asia and Europe, the United States was quite content with the legal regime that applied to terrorism, both your domestic law and your international law. And now, instead of terrorism happening to us, it's happened to you. And overnight, the United States says the world has changed. The law must change. All the rules must change. So you've declared a global war on terrorism, by the way, a concept we've been unable to define, but nevertheless, you've declared a war on terrorism. Every international terrorist is now an unlawful combatant, and every unlawful combatant is going to be placed before something that you're going to call a military commission. My point is that I think the administration has to begin, as Philippe has indicated, by saying, we fully appreciate the grave threat that terrorism has for the United States, but we will no longer approach our counterterrorism and anti-terrorism activities as a war on terrorism. It will no longer be done in the context of a war. We will do this with good law enforcement, we'll do it with good intelligence, we will support it with special elements of the armed forces when it's appropriate to do so and when it's legitimate to do so. It will be a combined effort, but we will no longer approach it as a war. We will no longer define terrorists as unlawful combatants. I agree completely with Philippe, and this is an argument that I put forward beginning in 2002. By declaring terrorists to be unlawful combatants, all that you do is to afford them a degree of credibility and status that they do not deserve. Whether you define them as enemy combatants or unlawful combatants, it accords them a status that criminals, that thugs do not deserve. They're terrorists. And because of that, we're not going to try them in a military court before any military commission. We're going to try them in Article III courts. I would oppose the National Security Court. I think it has more false than it has positive elements. I think in trying them before an Article III court, you should review the federal code and see if there are modifications that you can make to the federal code that would facilitate terrorist prosecutions but still fall within the parameters of due process and procedural safeguards as guaranteed by the Constitution. But they will be tried in Article III courts.